Hello, everyone. Let's get started. My name is Alan Hudson from the Immuno-Oncology Translational Network Data Management Resource Center. I also serve as Chair of Biostatistics and Bioinformatics at Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center. Before we start the seminar, I just have a few bookkeeping items to go over. For this special seminar, all questions were submitted in advance. Questions will be responded to at the end of the presentations. Closed captioning is available. The link will be in the Zoom chat box. You can cut and paste that in a separate browser. If you're having technical issues, you can make a comment in the Zoom chat box. With that, I would like to turn the proceedings over to Dr. Leah Mechanic, who is Program Director in the Genomic Epidemiology Branch of the Epidemiology and Genomics Research Program in NCI's Division of Cancer Control and Population Sciences. Dr. Mechanic.
Thank you, Dr. Hudson. On behalf of the Cancer Moonshot Seminar Series organizers, we want to welcome all of you to this special event. During his final State of the Union address, President Obama asked then Vice President Joe Biden, our current president, to lead a national effort to end cancer as we know it, a cancer moonshot. To inform these efforts, the NCI convened a blue ribbon panel of scientific experts, cancer leaders, and patient advocates to inform the goals of the cancer moonshot. 5 years ago, the Blue Ribbon Panel presented the report of their recommendations for achieving the Cancer Moonshot's ambitious goals for accelerating progress in cancer research. Today, as part of the Cancer Moonshot Seminar Series, we invited the co-chairs and members of the NCI Blue Ribbon Panel and the NCI Director, Dr. Ned Sharpless, to reflect back on the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Panel, to share updates and progress of the Cancer Moonshot, and to discuss future directions and potential for Cancer Moonshot initiatives. In this session, each panel member will present brief comments, and these comments will be followed by a general discussion. Our session will begin with 2 presentations on the history and vision of the Blue Ribbon Panel. Dr. Elizabeth Jaffe will present on the background and goals of the Blue Ribbon Panel, and then Dr. Tyler Jacks will present on the recommendations for research. Following these, Dr. Elena Martinez will speak on the cross-cutting theme of health disparities, and then Dina Singer will present on the progress of the Cancer Moonshot. Our last presentation will be by Dr. Sharpless, who will describe the future directions for the Cancer Moonshot. Finally, we'll end with a panel discussion addressing several of the questions that came in advance of the seminar. And in the interest of time, we'll hold this discussion until the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter. Dr. Elizabeth Jaffe is the Deputy Director of the Cindy Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center at Johns Hopkins and co-chair of the Blue Ribbon Panel. And she will be talking about the history and vision of the Blue Ribbon Panel report, background, and goals. Thanks.
Good afternoon to everyone. The Moonshot Initiative was born at a time when Vice President Biden had experienced a personal loss to cancer. But we also know that it was also a particularly opportunistic time because of recent advances in technologies that was accelerating the rate of target discovery and drug development. With this in mind, the Moonshot Initiative had 2 broad goals. The first was to accelerate progress in cancer that included prevention and screening. The specific goals were to cover the range from cutting-edge basic science all the way up to a wider uptake of standard of care. The goals had to be achievable. So the plan was to accomplish in 5 years what would normally take 10. To accomplish this, a Blue Ribbon Panel was established and tasked with identifying the opportunities. That is, areas that were most ripe for progress, as well as the impediments, including regulatory and financial, in cancer research that would require solutions. The second main goal was to encourage cooperation and to break down silos. This meant forging greater interactions among all stakeholders, industry, government, academia, advocacy groups, and the greater public. Implicit in this goal was to make sure we considered patients' needs. In other words, we needed to make sure the Blue Ribbon Panel recommendations were patient-focused. The Blue Ribbon Panel, let me just move to the next slide, sorry about that. The Blue Ribbon Panel was charged to accomplish 3 specific goals. The first was to develop 5 to 10 recommendations that were ripe for progress with additional emphasis and funding. The second was to identify major scientific and regulatory hurdles that can be overcome. And the third was to suggest ways to address knowledge gaps, develop technologies, and/or overcome impediments to implementation. Finally, the Blue Ribbon Panel was composed of 18 researchers, clinicians, nurses, advocates, and industry representatives who made sure that all recommendations would be patient-centric and would prioritize health disparities, symptom management, and implementation science. I'll stop there and turn it over to my colleague, Tyler Jacks, who will describe the Blue Ribbon Panel findings and recommendations.
Well, thanks very much, Liz. It's nice to be with you all, including my fellow co-chairs of the Blue Ribbon Panel and members of the Blue Ribbon Panel. It's wonderful to reflect back to 5 years ago when we were actively engaged in pulling this report together. As Liz said, we had several members of the research community, clinical community, nurses, patients, and others participating in this activity. Beyond the Blue Ribbon Panel, we also had several working groups, and the total number of individuals who participated in those working groups, I think, exceeded 150. So there was extensive contribution from many people to what I'm about to tell you. And I'd also like to emphasize the important contributions of the NCI and the NCI staff who really helped shepherd this activity from the beginning. So in the end, we developed 10 recommendations. We actually developed 13 recommendations, but as Liz mentioned, we were charged with reducing the number to 10. So we had a few go to the cutting room floor. That's not entirely true. We actually just merged a couple of recommendations that were similar into one recommendation. So they were all represented in the end. There were 10, and we were excited about all 10 of these. They're listed here, and I'll just briefly mention some important aspects of them. Firstly, with respect to direct patient engagement, we felt it important that cancer research look different in the context of the Moonshot effort, different in many different ways, but importantly, different in the degree to which patients were actively involved in the development of these new research activities. And several of the outcomes that you'll hear about shortly relate to direct patient engagement in this effort. With respect to cancer immunology and immunotherapy, this has changed the field in terms of how we think about cancer and how we treat it. But it's still true today that there's much we don't know. And given the power of this approach, we felt it important to bring together experts across the continuum in a networked activity to understand cancer immunotherapy more deeply in order to take full advantage of the power of this approach. Similarly, with respect to drug resistance, many new agents have been developed over the last 10 to 20 years, and they're having great effect for subsets of patients. But in many cases, the drugs don't work initially. There's an immediate resistance, or they fail to work over time. And although we've learned a lot about how that happens, there's still much to be learned. And so this seemed to be another very critical area worthy of investment in this mechanism. A cross-cutting theme that emerged in our activities was the importance of sharing data. Data is generated in lots of places by lots of individuals. Sometimes those data are held close. In other cases, and importantly, we think for the future, it's important to share those data. And for this initiative, we thought it important to create mechanisms to improve the ability to share data, a data ecosystem at the national scale. But also to encourage cancer researchers and others engaged in this activity to share their data. We wanted there to be a focus on pediatric cancers, and this took two forms, one shown here, fusion oncoproteins in pediatric cancer. This is a particular type of driver mutation in pediatric cancers. Much has been learned, much can be learned, and we thought it was important to have a concentrated effort in this area. We also brought together interest in immunotherapy for pediatric cancers in the second item B up here, the Cancer Immunotherapy Network. Beyond treatment, there is the patient's response to treatment and symptom management following treatment. And this is another important area that's very patient-focused, and it became one of our strong recommendations. We also wanted to include the important area of cancer prevention and also early detection. Beyond the treatment of the disease, if we can make progress in detecting the disease at earlier stages, we're in a better position to treat it more effectively and perhaps prevent the development of symptoms altogether. This was a very high priority recommendation. The next item relates to retrospective analysis of patients who've been treated with standard of care. Patients have been treated with standard of care cancer treatment for many, many years, and we have a lot of information about who responded, who failed to respond. But there hasn't been a dedicated effort to really try to understand, using modern molecular science, what the biomarkers of response and resistance to those therapies might be. And this seemed like a rich opportunity given the scientific advances. The second to last item relates to developing a human tumor atlas. And this really refers to the use of molecular profiling technologies that have improved in the quality of the information that we can obtain from patient material really immeasurably over the last 5 or so years. We wanted to put a real full court press on understanding the evolution of cancer from its earliest stages through its latest stages, including its response to therapy, using these very powerful technologies, and to do that in a network fashion to produce atlases that would be available to the community to analyze. And finally, in a sort of catch-all category, we surfaced many, many new technologies that were just emerging that we felt needed to be enhanced through these activities. And these included new ways to diagnose, to identify, as well as to treat cancers. And so collectively, this formed our recommendation J, or the 10th recommendation. And as I mentioned, there were many cross-cutting themes. I've highlighted some of these, and you'll hear more about them from Elena in a moment. Health disparities was a key consideration across many of these activities. Cancer prevention, I've mentioned specifically. Data sharing came up time and time again. And of course, collaboration is really at the heart of all of what we're talking about here. The point being that we can do more together than we can do as individual investigators. And I think one of the real mission statements of the Moonshot activity is that we can all make greater progress by pulling together and coordinating our efforts as individual researchers through the great work of the National Cancer Institute. So I'll stop there and turn things over to Elena, who will talk about cross-cutting themes and health disparity.
All righty. Hopefully everybody can see my slides. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. It is so exciting. This anniversary event is really joyous. I just can't believe it's been 5 years. Reflecting on these last 5 years, so much has happened since the unveiling of the Blue Ribbon Panel report. And I can tell you that the discussion and deliberations that took place among the prestigious members of the Blue Ribbon Panel were thoughtful, extremely provocative, and with very much a sense of purpose. We were inspired by then Vice President Biden, who shared with us his passion for accelerating cancer research and ending cancer as we know it. Here you see some excerpts from the Blue Ribbon Panel report and the video production that accompanied the unveiling of the recommendations. From very early on, the Blue Ribbon Panel recognized the importance of making a difference so that all members of our society had an opportunity to benefit from the discoveries that would be made through this landmark investment. This would be achieved through the health disparities cross-cutting theme, as was noted earlier. Accomplishments from this investment are evident, with many more still to come. Of course, when the Blue Ribbon Panel deliberated, we had no idea that we would face two significant threats to these accomplishments. If our goal was to accelerate discoveries and get these to those that need it the most, the two pandemics that we experienced, COVID-19 and racism, certainly threatened this goal. So how do we continue these efforts? How do we make sure that we continue to move forward and not backwards? Perhaps I can give you a personal perspective. I live in California, and wildfires are unfortunately an annual now event in this beautiful progressive state. Wildfires are devastating. They cause a lot of suffering, loss of your home, loss of dignity, loss of health, and yes, loss of life. We know that wildfires are caused by nature, but they're also caused by us, humans. I guess one can say that we've had two types of wildfires in the last 2 years. One caused by natural events, Epidemics and pandemics can be unforeseen, as we've already experienced. Racial injustice, however, is caused by us, the result of our actions and our inactions. And yes, at times the actions are deliberate. Just like we in California and other parts of the world are trying to figure out how to prevent wildfires, we need to do the same for these two pandemics. For disparities and inequities, the Blue Ribbon Panel Cancer Moonshot Initiative had this in mind via the cross-cutting theme of health disparities. And I am so happy and frankly, really thrilled to see the many initiatives the National Cancer Institute has implemented intramurally and extramurally to address the devastations caused by these two pandemics. So in fact, we now have added opportunities to accelerate our work on equity, justice, and disparities. We have to be aspirational, and I have hope. Just like the earth has an opportunity to regenerate after a wildfire, we have the opportunity to do the same. We have this new soil. Yes, it is really, really damaged, but in it, we have a chance to plant new trees, make new beginnings, and we have started to do that. I also venture to say that prevention means igniting some controlled fires to prevent new wildfires. This is in line with the call of the Grace John Lewis made for all of us to get into good trouble, necessary trouble, the type that will help redeem the soul of America. I know some of you are getting into some of this good trouble, so please do keep it up. As we've seen, more recent events in this country continue to threaten equity and justice. Let us not be afraid to ignite these control fires because we simply cannot afford more acts of injustice. I leave you with these words from the song Beyond the Sea. It has kind of a moonshot feel to it. I particularly like George Benson's version, by the way, so please check it out. It says, it's far beyond the star, it's near beyond the moon. I know beyond the doubt, my heart will lead me there soon. So let us continue to work together and join the National Cancer Institute on this journey to recovery and true sustained change to deliver the success of our discoveries to the communities that need it the most. Thank you.
Dr. Singer is next, and she will be talking about the progress of the Cancer Moonshot. Thank you, Dr. Singer.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be able to celebrate the 5th anniversary. As I think both Liz and Tyler reflected, and Elena, it was quite an experience, and it's hard to believe that it's actually been 5 years. So as Liz told you, the Cancer Moonshot identified 2 major goals: accelerating our understanding of cancer and enhancing data sharing. But there was also a third goal that I think Tyler alluded to, of encouraging greater collaboration. And while the focus of the Blue Ribbon Panel is really on the first of the goals, I think we've made remarkable progress towards meeting all 3 of those goals over the past 5 years. As we've heard from Tyler, the Blue Ribbon Panel was charged with defining the areas of research that were poised to be accelerated, and those areas were defined in the 10 recommendations that are listed here. The NCI was then responsible for the implementation of those recommendations, and during the past 5 years, we've initiated programs that span all of those recommendations and that have truly accelerated our understanding of cancer. And the credit for that accomplishment goes in large part to the more than 120 NCI staff who enthusiastically devoted their time, their energy, and their scientific expertise to first develop and then to manage the many moonshot initiatives. So those accomplishments, some of which I'll tell you about, have depended on their continued dedication and management, and we're really grateful to them for it. So Tyler described the rationale for the DRP recommendations. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to use this template that I'm showing you to highlight just a few of the moonshot initiatives that were implemented in each of the areas of the recommendations in each of the 5-year period. And as you'll see, and I hope you'll keep in mind, we've really accomplished much more than what I'm going to be able to highlight and show you in this landscape. And I hope you'll keep that in mind as we go forward.
Dr. Singer, your mic is a little muffled again, so maybe you just move up 2 inches.
Sorry, is that better?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, sorry. I will try to keep close to the mic. So let's look first at the recommendation on patient engagement. So I think we all understand that active patient engagement contributes to better health outcomes, but it can also be difficult for patients to navigate the complexities of the healthcare systems. And so the recommendation called for networks to assist cancer patients in finding appropriate clinical trials and to assist researchers in enrolling patients in clinical trials, patients from diverse populations. So NCI Connect and MyPart were started in 2018 and have formed partnerships among patients, advocates, and healthcare providers to improve the understanding and the treatment of rare tumors. PECGS is a new patient engagement initiative that was started in 2020 that encourages cancer patients and survivors to be active participants in cancer research. It incorporates cancer genomics into the characterization of rare or highly lethal cancers and into cancers that are prevalent in underserved and understudied populations. Tyler talked a little bit about immunotherapies and how they've shown incredible promise for some types of cancer in both adults and children. But in other cancers, current approaches have limited efficacy. So there are a number of moonshot programs that are focused on preclinical studies that are designed to improve the efficacy, durability, and safety of immunotherapy. The Immuno-Oncology Translation Network, which is actually hosting this panel, is one of the largest initiatives within the Cancer Moonshot, with new programs that have been launched every year since 2017. Research teams in the IOTN are exploring ways to optimize and harness the body's immune system. Their studies are really aimed at better understanding the immune mechanisms that contribute to tumor regression, progression, or resistance, and to adverse effects that are often observed. The IOTN is applying this knowledge to discover new immunotherapeutic strategies, in particular using immunoengineering and predictive modeling. Importantly, some teams are also developing new approaches for immunoprevention, especially in inherited syndrome. While IOTN is primarily addressing adult tumors, the Pediatric Immunotherapy Network focuses on the tumors and immune responses that are distinct in children. Its researchers have developed approaches to sustain anti-tumor immunity by limiting what we call T-cell exhaustion, and they're now testing combination of CAR T-cell therapies in childhood leukemias. And it's important to note that for both IOTN and the Pediatric Immunotherapy Network, many of these projects are now moving into clinical trials. So programs related to symptom management, as well as prevention and detection strategies, have been started in each of the 5 years. They span a wide range of activities and represent a major focus of the Moonshot activities. So implementation science has been a major focus of the Moonshot, with many of the prevention and control programs supported in this area. Some of them to highlight are the Cancer Center Cessation Initiative, which supports implementation of sustainable tobacco cessation treatment programs at NCI Cancer Center. AXIS and the American Indian Colorectal Cancer Screening Program are working to increase colorectal cancer screening, follow-up, and referral, especially in underserved groups. So while these two programs, AXIS and the American Indian program, and others explicitly address health disparities, as Elena talked about, addressing health disparities was identified as a cross-cutting theme in the recommendations. As a result, and I should point out, all moonshot programs are required to consider health disparities. A number of the programs in this category focus on reducing symptom burden and optimizing therapeutic outcomes. So one example is IMPACT, a consortium that was started in 2018 that evaluates methods to reduce symptom burden. Tyler talked about the Human Tumor Atlas Network, which is developing atlases that visualize the 3D architecture of the tumor, its composition, multi-scale interactions, and its evolution as it grows and metastasizes. Even though H10 was understood when we founded it to be a pilot program, it's actually been highly successful. Data from 8 initial atlases representing 7 tumor types are already publicly available through the H10 data portal, with more to come. And these atlases already show comprehensive features of tumor organization that will inform both cancer biology and hopefully begin to predict therapeutic response. I've only had time to highlight a small fraction. Hold on. There we go. I've only had time really to talk about a very small fraction of the new moonshot programs, but I hope this completed landscape gives you a sense of the breadth and the depth of the moonshot programs, all of which I think are continuing to make remarkable progress and accelerate our understanding of cancer. So the programs I've described respond to the first goals of the BRP recommendations, but they were implemented within the context of the other 2 overarching goals of the moonshot that I talked about in the beginning and that Liz has described as well. The second goal was to enhance data sharing, and we've addressed that in 2 ways. One, the NCI has developed a cancer research data commons, responding also to the recommendation for a national data ecosystem, and that data commons houses and will ultimately make available all of the moonshot data. The other way we've accomplished data sharing is to require that all moonshot funded publications and data are required to be made immediately and freely and publicly available upon publication of the manuscript. This requirement has actually been the impetus for both Self-Press and Elsevier to adopt a model where all papers have the option to be published in an open access format. In support of the third goal, to encourage greater collaboration, we've encouraged collaboration within networks, but also across networks through interactions and sharing of data and resources, trans-moonshot meetings between funded groups of investigators have brought together moonshot investigators from across multiple programs to share their research and to spark cross-initiative collaborations. This panel is part of a seminar series, a moonshot seminar series that's designed to inform both the research community and the public about moonshot research accomplishments. I think it's fair to say that the moonshot has been a massive undertaking. It has really already borne scientific fruit and laid critical foundations for future advances. It has truly accelerated our understanding of cancer, and we're enthusiastic about the progress already made and look forward to the additional discoveries and innovations that come from this research. And with that, I will hand it over to Ned.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is really fun. I'm grateful to the organizers to invite me to come speak and attend this. It's great kind of getting the band back together here to hear how this initiative was planned and, hear from Tyler and Liz about the way the theme areas were identified and from Elena about how cancer health disparities research and health equity was really baked into the entire vision of the moonshot, and then to hear about how the whole enterprise was operationalized by the NCI under Dina's leadership. And I think it's really good time to take stock of what the moonshot's accomplished to date and where it's going now, given where things are. So but maybe the first important piece of progress to really recognize is the impact of this program in terms of galvanizing the cancer research community and really producing this new way of thinking about data sharing and fostering collaboration. And it's been very, very important to the NCI, and I think very, very exciting. So in that respect, the moonshot has already been terrifically successful. It's really helped build us this moonshot towards the President Biden's goal of ending cancer as we know it. And that, we think that the things that the moonshot prioritized in terms of these research areas and collaboration and data sharing and a focus on health disparities, those are things that will help get us to that goal. But the question now comes for the NCI is what comes after the moonshot itself, and really that's two questions if you think about it. So one is what remains to be done in the last few years of the moonshot, and are there areas where we still have work yet to do? And the answer there is yes. And then, but also, after the funding for this effort sunsets, what comes next? What does the post moonshot effort at the NCI look like? So let me try and address both of those briefly. So in terms of the ongoing, finishing off the moonshot, we still have work to do. We've identified some gaps in technology development, such as data visualization tools and imaging capabilities. We still have an interest in cell-based therapy manufacturing, a few specific areas like that, where I think we have, made decisions of further plans and are still working in those areas. And then there are a few efforts, for example, the recommendation to do retrospective analysis of biospecimens that have been collected in national clinical trials networks. That effort has taken longer than we expected, and is still certainly an area where we anticipate a future focus, and including a molecular profiling to predict response to treatment initiative that is positioned to undertake this recommendation further in coming years. So there's still some work left to do on the moonshot, and I think that we'll see those play out with the remaining time left on this effort, on this initiative. And then there's what comes after the moonshot, and of course the administration and Congress have something to say about this as to where if there will be additional support from Congress for a moonshot-like activity. I think it is fair to say, as many have seen, that there is a discussion of a 21st Century Cures 2.0 initiative within Congress led by Representatives Upton and DeGette, the same representatives who led the way for 21st Century Cures Act that provided the funding for the cancer moonshot. And this legislation is being worked on now in Congress. And if it includes something like a Moonshot 2.0, we will wait and see. I think it's important to say that any initiative in cancer research has to continue to realize the importance of investigator-initiated science. So we believe at the NCI that funding these bold ideas that come from that are initiated by scientists in their own right is a very important part of what we do. That has been challenging in recent years at the NCI because of a huge influx of applications to the NCI. And so we're most enthusiastic about support from Congress that allows us to continue to support that so-called investigator-initiated science, in addition to efforts like the Moonshot that are focused around specific scientific areas. And so we'll see how that plays out. Of course, one of the things that is being talked about significantly within Cancer Moonshot, or rather 21st Century Cures Moonshot 2.0, is this notion of ARPA-H, this new initiative to take on specific kinds of research projects and biomedical research with DARPA-like capabilities. And that is still very much underway, and we believe will have a major focus on cancer. And so we look forward to further information in that as well. But, so I think while at this time, it's good to say, I think it's right to say that the Moonshot has really succeeded in some of its goals in terms of galvanizing the community and accelerating cancer research. It's yet to be seen what's going to become what's going to come of new initiatives, but that should be forthcoming soon. And as I said, we also need to continue to find ways to prioritize investigator-initiated basic science. We remain strongly committed to these approaches. I think we're very proud of the work of the Moonshot and the framework that Dina described and how successful that has been. But we now need to build for what comes next. What I can assure you is that whether there's a Cancer Moonshot 2.0 or whatever new initiative, we will continue to harness the community that the current Moonshot has galvanized, and we will ensure that the results of these diverse programs are leveraged for broad dissemination, application, and adoption to maximize their benefits to cancer research and really to patients everywhere with cancer. And we will continue to make overcoming health disparities a cross-cutting theme of the work at the NCI. So I think it's absolutely essential that we build on the success of the Moonshot to date for future NCI initiatives. And I think with that, I'll wrap up, and I think we can have further discussion.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sharpless, and thank you for the rest of the panel. Your comments were great for setting the stage for the discussion. We had several questions that came in prior to the seminar. And what I'll do is I'll direct these questions to specific panelists, and then I will open it up for the rest of the panel to add in future comments, find additional comments. So the first question that came in that actually is for the whole panel is, could each of you list 1 to 2 takeaways or new perspectives from the Blue Ribbon panel and the Cancer Moonshot? And to make this easier, maybe we'll go in the order of the agenda, and we'll start with Dr. Jaffe.
Yes, thank you. I think that the Blue Ribbon panel and Moonshot brought up several important points, one of which was the importance of team science and also data sharing. And I think we've learned that progress can only be made when we really share data very rapidly. And I think we've learned that even from COVID-19, we've been able to really make a lot of progress, in particular in understanding the biology and understanding how to vaccinate. Well, the same thing with cancer. And I think what has happened is the National Cancer Institute has really taken that to heart. And many of the programs include engaging the community, sharing data, and also developing team science mechanisms.
Great, Dr. Jacks?
Sure. I think I would highlight 2 things as well. Firstly, the Moonshot effort, and especially President Biden's urging to go fast, go smartly, but go fast. This sense of urgency, the need to move as quickly as we possibly can to get to our shared goals. I think the Moonshot participants in the Blue Ribbon panel felt that, and I think the funded investigators, as the program has rolled out, feel that as well. So I think a sense of urgency, which Liz just mentioned COVID-19, I think once again, we can see the importance of urgency in exploring new approaches to these problems. The second I would say is the role of patient engagement. And we've touched on it a few times already. The importance of including the patient's perspective on the one hand, but also their direct participation on the other. And I think what we've learned is that patients are actually quite motivated to participate in cancer research, not just being subjects of treatment, but actually participating in cancer research. And I think this will make everything go more quickly and more effectively.
Great, thanks. Dr. Martinez?
So a couple of things, some of it may sound a little repetitive, but I think it's worth repeating. You know, the enthusiasm and the energy galvanized by bringing this group of people together from all walks of life around the common theme of cancer was extremely exciting. And of course, we were led by a highly enthusiastic leader now, President Biden. From a personal perspective, I reflect on our conversations that we had with the panel on the challenges that underserved communities face, the challenges that providers that care for them face, and the challenges that investigators who work with these communities face. So you heard all this great, exciting science and discoveries that are coming aboard from the Cancer Moonshot that Dr. Singer mentioned. So to me, the question is, how do we get those discoveries beyond the individuals and patients who always tend to benefit from them? And I think that's the question that we need to keep asking ourselves. We need to keep checking ourselves. And this is what the Cancer Moonshot is doing. The requirement that health disparities be addressed, whether it's basic science, clinical science, population science. So we need to keep that in mind.
Thank you. Dr. Singer?
Yeah, I think my thoughts pretty much echo what has already been said. I think the moonshot and more recently the pandemic have really highlighted the willingness of the entire community to work together for the greater good. And by community, I don't mean just researchers, I mean advocates, patients, anybody who's been touched by cancer. And that's really been very, very gratifying to all of us to see how quickly people can come together and work together again for the greater good. I think the moonshot also, for the first time, really brought to the forefront the importance of patient engagement, the patient perspective, but also the importance of addressing health disparities in all aspects of the research that we do. And I think those are lessons that will stay with the community even after this phase of the moonshot has ended and whatever the next phase is.
Thank you. Dr. Sharpless, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, you're going fifth, not much. I think the good points have already been taken by my colleagues. I will make one additional related point that is interesting, though, that is, where I sit when I go to these NIH meetings and talk to the other, directors of the various NIHs, it's really impressive the effect the moonshot has had on the rest of biomedical research in the United States. So I think that the commitment to data sharing, the publication policy, these things that were really piloted, if you will, in the moonshot are now kind of becoming the NIH policy at large. And often people are looking at this experience and talking about it. So I think this has been really, really good for biomedical research at large beyond just cancer research.
Great, thank you. So the next question was actually already touched upon by many of you, and that was, can you talk about the role of patients and research advocates in the development of the Blue Ribbon Panel report and the ongoing Cancer Moonshot initiatives? And maybe we'll start with Dr. Tyler Jacks, then go to Elizabeth Jaffe and Dr. Singer. Dr. Jaffe and Dr. Singer.
Sure. Well, as you heard, we had advocates involved in the Blue Ribbon Panel and the working group. So the voice of the patient and the patient advocates was heard from the beginning. And I think as Dina nicely laid out, the implementation likewise has had a strong focus on patient engagement. The patient engagement in cancer genome sequencing effort that she mentioned. And that is particularly important because I think we are at some level living in two worlds. There are individuals who are being treated at certain centers where genomic profiling is commonplace, and then there are others who are not. And yet we know that this information can be highly valuable. So reaching out to people across the community to employ these technologies is very important and addresses some of the health disparities that we've been discussing. Rare tumors is another example where there's a network directly related to patient engagement to encourage individuals with rare cancers to contribute information and biospecimens. And the last thing I would say is we talked about the importance of the pediatric cancers, and here patient engagement, patient advocates have been very involved, directly involved in the networks that have been formed. So it's a common theme and it's playing out in the funded initiatives.
Thank you. Dr. Jaffe?
Yes, I want to reiterate exactly what Tyler said, maybe in a slightly different way, but to me, we really learned a lot about how little we have put into health disparities in implementation science compared to the major problems they are. And I think we all listened pretty attentively and have really worked hard to make these themes that really penetrated all of the different priorities. And I think also pediatric cancers, again, very little, because they're uncommon, they're rare, very little money was put into understanding the differences in biology between pediatric and adult cancers. And they are totally different cancers biologically, and therefore the therapeutics are going to be different. And so I think these patient advocates and advocacy groups all brought these to the table in such a way that we realized that they had to be at the forefront of prioritization.
Great, thank you. Dr. Singer, you want to add anything?
Yeah, just 2 points. One is that clearly patients are involved in those programs like the PECGS, where you're actively engaging patients. But it's important to note that we now have patient advocates in almost all of our moonshot programs. Even in the basic science, the H10 and IATN, patient advocates are involved because we see the importance of having that perspective throughout the entire continuum. The other point I wanted to make is that one of the recommendations for the cancer data ecosystem was to create a place where patients could also get information. And that's something that we're still working on. It's something that will be incorporated into the Cancer Research Data Commons down the road. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dr. Singer. Did anyone else in the panel want to add anything to this question? Okay, so the next question we've also touched upon a little bit, but we got a specific question about what advances related to health disparities were recommended by the Blue Ribbon panel, and what progress has been made in this area through the Cancer Moonshot, and what challenges still remain to be addressed. And I'll start by directing this question to Dr. Martinez and then Dr. Singer.
Okay, well, yes, very, very important question. Obviously, we've heard a lot about that already. So in the interest of time, I will maybe just focus on the area of implementation science, screening, and early detection through the investment in the ACCESS program, the accelerating colorectal cancer screening and follow-up through implementation science. It's a long title, but that is it. And, especially now during COVID, screening took a pause. And we know the implications are there. And for underserved communities for colorectal cancer, it is the cancer with one of the lowest screening rates in these underserved communities. So the investment on colorectal cancer screening through the Cancer Moonshot is really, really evident. And now more than ever with the COVID pandemic, this is something that we need to keep working on and continue to address. There are challenges that are still evident. And for example, now we have the other pandemic of racism and structural racism, but it's always been there. We know that, but it's now been heightened, and our recognition of it has been heightened. So new RFAs have come out to address this from NCI and NIH. So I think progress will be made to address this important area. And then lastly, I will say that I am co-chair of a recently formed National Cancer Advisory Board subcommittee that will be advising the National Cancer Institute on strategic approaches and opportunities for research on cancer among racial, ethnic, and underserved communities. Our charge is to evaluate the current status, assess barriers to progress, and then identify potential strategies. The subgroup work group has just started. We've had just a few meetings. So there's a lot of work that will be accomplished through that work group. And so stay tuned, more information will be coming.
Dr. Singer, you.
Yeah, so Elena very nicely articulated the importance of addressing health disparities and implementation science. So I'm going to focus on the other end of the research spectrum and point out that in order to really address health disparities, we also need to understand the underlying cancer biology that might contribute to health disparities. And so we've invested in developing preclinical models that derive from a diverse patient population. The H10 in particular is actively looking for samples from diverse populations so that we can fill the entire research spectrum to be representative of our population. And I think that's an important contribution that the Moonshot has made in addition to the focus on implementation science.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Singer. Does anyone else from the panel want to address this question as well? Okay. I think I know Dr. Jacks, you have to leave shortly, so I'm actually gonna give you a future thinking question and then open it up to the panel. And that is, how do you think, and I think Dr. Sharpless touched on this, how do you think the members of the Blue Ribbon Panel on Cancer Moonshot can continue to be involved in emerging in important areas of cancer research? And then how could this process developed by the Blue Ribbon Panel be used to address basic and translational cancer research challenges in the future? Maybe I'll start with you and then I'll open it up to the rest of the panel.
Well, thanks. And I apologize for having to drop off a bit early. I'm teaching MIT undergraduates at 1 o'clock, which is the reason. But I think that, the Blue Ribbon panelists themselves, but I would just extend that to other leaders in our field, the opportunity to think together as we did in that case, and to think with the leadership of the NCI, which was really a pleasure to do, to help shape strategy for the Institute going forward. I think that's an opportunity that's not going to go away. And I think that Ned was sort of referencing the future opportunities that might emerge, whether it's in ARPA-H or some other form. I think that sort of strategic thinking is critical in coordination of these larger scale efforts and identifying where the real opportunities are. It doesn't eliminate the importance of investigator-initiated research. As he mentioned, it's very, very important also. But these kind of coordinated activities are not a one-shot opportunity. This is something that I think we should be engaged in continuously, and I'm excited to do that. So thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Sharpless, do you want to add anything?
First to thank Tyler for his leadership on this topic before he drops off. He's been a really important advisor to the NCI for a long, long time, including me. I've asked Tyler a lot of hard questions and he always gives me great answers. So I really appreciate his advice and counsel, and go get those MIT undergraduates. I would say, it's a really good time to be having this discussion. You have a president who is, and a first lady who've been personally touched by cancer, a vice president who's very interested in cancer, who started her career as a cancer researcher cleaning glassware in her mother's lab. You have a Congress where there is bipartisan interest in cancer. And we've seen this through specific bills like the STAR Act, targeting pediatric survivorship and other aspects of pediatric cancer, as well as, good appropriations to the NCI for the last several years, and knock on wood, 2021 as well, 2022 as well. So I think there's a real interest in the administration and the Congress to make progress. And then, of course, the American public is eager to see progress in cancer. And, biomedical research in one sense has a very good brand right now because of, I think, the importance of biomedical research has played in the response to the pandemic. So it is a very good time to be having this conversation about what comes next and how we should do that. And the NCI is, very enthusiastic about this advice from the extramural community. I thought the Blue Ribbon Panel process was extremely helpful to the National Cancer Institute and incredibly a good one. And we continue to benefit from these advisors as discussed. Elena mentioned our working group to one of our subcommittees, for example, of how we continue to get input, and that's important. But I would also just reiterate what Tyler alluded to, that the one real problem we have at the NCI is keeping up with a number of applications. So we've seen this influx of new ideas and new investigators coming to the National Cancer Institute seeking funding for their investigator-initiated ideas. And this is a really good problem to have. I mean, this says that cancer research is vibrant and there are lots of good ideas and good new people who want to work in the field. And the NCI has to accommodate those individuals and find a way to support their research. And so, other new initiatives that are exciting and certainly will be very important shouldn't come at the cost of that. We have to also figure out a way to support, basically the R01 pool is what I'm speaking about. Because if that at some number, if prospects of funding from the NCI become too dim, then that'll turn off investigators and they'll start to move into other areas of biomedical research. So to create that vibrant research community in cancer, we believe that the investigator-initiated research is also very, very important to support. So that's the balance of focused programs along the lines of what the Moonshot did very successfully, matched with support for the research community in general.
Thank you, Dr. Sharpless. I was wondering if any of the other panels, I saw Dr. Jaffe, you had unmuted, wanted to add to this.
I just want to amplify what both Tyler and Ned said. I think the Moonshot was a start. It's not the end. we even knew at the time, I mean, this is what then former Vice President, now President Biden has said. He said, this is going to be a start. We will try to do in 5 years what normally would have been accomplished in 10. And I think we've done that. You've heard from Dina how much progress has been made, but this is just the beginning. And when you take a look at how, with the right funding, with the right bringing all of the community, even the international community together, we were able to solve a vaccine problem for COVID. We've been able to understand the biology in just a year or a year and a half's time. This is very important because that was a lot more money put into that one problem than all of cancer. So I think we really need to think about that. And as a community, not just scientists, but the greater community interested in cancer, and it's mostly everybody, we should really understand that we need to support more cancer research. And again, as Ned said, it's not just the current things we're supporting, but we need to think about what are the next steps. We need to think about supporting the R01 pool because, as he said, we want to make sure that we are supporting our next generation of researchers. And they're getting a little frustrated right now because we don't seem to have the pool of funding that maybe other areas of research do. And so even though there's been a lot of funding, it really isn't that much considering cancer is many different problems, not just one problem. So I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you, Dr. Jaffe. Does anyone else from the panel want to add anything?
Sure. Thank you. I would just make it really, really brief. I think the Blue Ribbon Panel has created a blueprint for what we can do in the future. And we have the steps. We've learned how to do them well. We can continue this. Again, I will also echo what's been said about the early stage investigators. We are losing them. Physician scientists especially. So I'm glad to see some of the initiatives that the National Cancer Institute is making of them. These early stage investigators have little experience with these large infrastructure grants and running them. So, they don't have the opportunities that those of us who've been around the block a little bit have to run these large P's and U's yet. So we need to invest in them with, the investigator-initiated research.
Dr. Singer, I saw you unmuted. Do you want to make a final point here?
Just one final point. One of the things that then Vice President Biden was concerned about in establishing the Cancer Moonshot was that we operated in silos. And I think this whole effort has really broken down those silos, broken them down across the cancer research community, broken them down within NCI, frankly. And I think we're now all functioning really as an integrated whole, including, as we talked about, patient advocates and other members of the community. And that precedent, I think, really helped us at NCI to respond very quickly to the pandemic because we were working together and we had learned how to do that. And I think that's something that will continue in future years. The point that Elena and Ned made about Liz about early stage investigators is a really critical one. We continue to emphasize early stage investigators and also, and I think this is critically important for our effort in health disparities, in engaging underrepresented minorities in our cancer research workforce. So I think those are challenges we face going forward to continue this thrust of working together and broadening our work.
Thank you, Dr. Singer. I think we're actually just at the end of time. I want to thank our panelists for their fantastic comments and presentations and this provocative discussion. I would ask you to please join us for our next Cancer Moonshot Seminar Series presentation on Thursday, October 28th. This is by Dr. Martha Shrubswell. She will be talking about the integrative single cell atlas of host and microenvironment and colorectal neoplastic transformation. And this is from the Blue Ribbon Panel recommendation, the generation of a human tumor atlas. And you can register now for this webinar. And if you have any questions for us, you can email at cmss@mail.nih.gov. And thank you everyone for joining us today and for a really provocative session. Thank you.